Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Uninterrupted. I'm your host, Chris Hammonds, and with me today is our COO, John Fausz. John, say hello.
Hey, everybody.
All right, as always, we're going to get straight to it. So, one of the things I hear a lot, I'm hearing it more and more, is, I just had this guy tell me just yesterday that he personally purchases or outsources his IT, so he does not have anything to do with it. He doesn't want anything to do with it. He pays money, so he doesn't have to know anything about IT and cybersecurity. Now, why do so many business leaders still view cybersecurity as just an IT problem?
Well, I think there's multiple factors to this. One of the things is this was maybe acceptable 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, but it's really kind of not anymore. What it looks like, though, is the nerds have kind of took this over from the people. And I say that as an endearing term. We took this on for companies and we said, hey, we'll do this for you. And when we're looking at IT, that was something that we had the possibility to actually do. And so these people don't know the differences between NAT policies or what a RAID is on a server. They don't care. And so when it came to, these are the outcomes that I want to do as a business leader, then we would say, okay, this is how we're going to achieve them, right? So, and we wouldn't even sometimes tell them how we're going to achieve them. It's like, okay, here's the price to do this, and we're going to get you these goals. And how we configure the servers and the PCs and the networks is not something that they needed to know. It was just, we're going to take care of this for you and do that for you. And so when we put that and they said, okay, this is how we're going to do IT, they just knew that it was kind of getting taken care of because internal IT people or us or whatever, as long as it was in the right price point of what they were wanting to do, they didn't have to have intimate knowledge about how it worked. They didn't even need to have a high level knowledge of how it worked. It just needed to work.
Right.
But cybersecurity changes all that. And the reason that it changes all that is because we're making a decision that IT people just do not have enough information in order to make. And we can talk about why those decisions are and everything like that, but I don't know what data you have. I don't know what's your sensitive data. I don't 100% know what you're protecting. I can look at the shared drives and I can look at the drives and make an inference on that, but I don't have any way to know which one of your employees should have access to which. What kind of data should this person have access to? Is it sufficient within their job role? I can't have the decision of what is the acceptable amount of risk that your company is willing to take and say, hey, we're maybe not going to protect this data as fully as this data. What financial information you're protecting, how the direct accesses to the financials happen. When I would talk years ago, and I kind of joke now when I talk to people about how do you write checks to people? Because there was a rash of check washing that was happening where somebody got a copy of a mailbox key and they were putting their outgoing mail in the a USPS post office mailbox, one of the big blue mailboxes, and somebody had a copy key. They opened it up and they took all the things that looked like checks, outgoing checks out of there from the mailbox, and they changed, they made new checks with just the only difference was who was getting paid. The amount was the same, the check number was the same, everything was the same. So it would clear and go to this person, you go to the fraudster, and they stole the money, right? But it would take a while for the company to catch on that this was going on. I never thought in a million years I'd be asking people, okay, what do you physically do with your checks? Well, how do you do checks? How do you take payments? How do you access your bank accounts? Do you have multi-factor authentication? All these things. Those are all things that IT never really had to touch, that now in a modern cybersecurity perspective are part of the overarching umbrella. I can't make decisions about them from an IT perspective or from a cybersecurity perspective. It has to be the business that does it. It has to be the business leadership that touches that. But then they have to make a decision on that because they're the ones that know how does this happen? How does risk actually flow through their network? Or how does risk actually, what their risk tolerance is for the organization? And they're the ones that have to make the decision. And I think that's taken a while for them to wrap their heads around because we took over all the computer, all the nerdy stuff for them for years. And they're like, I never had to think about this. Now, this is why you have to think about it now.
Gotcha. So for our business leaders who are tuning in, well, it almost to me sounds like it would be kind of dangerous for a business leader to disconnect completely from cybersecurity, correct?
Yeah, it would.
So why, I guess let me ask you this. Well, why is it so dangerous? Like, I know you kind of touched on a few things, but like for speaking directly to a business leader, what's dangerous about this?
Yeah, well, you're allowing, so in our case, you're allowing a third party to make basically full business risk for you, of decisions for you without your involvement or your kind of oversight over what's actually happening. Now, we have your best interests in heart, and we're going to do everything possible to generically protect you as much as possible. But at the end of the day, you're deciding what's the data security that's going on, what's the security of the specific type of data. You're outsourcing that into somebody else's hands. Say you have an internal IT person that's doing this. Well, you're giving that decision over to an employee who may not have the responsibility to be able to make that decision, right? They may not be the person that would be able to make that business risk decision for your organization. When we look at this, at the end of the day, it kind of depends on who's responsible for the things that you're protecting. So you as a business owner, if you own the business, then the responsibility to keep the business functioning is on your shoulders. The business survival is kind of on your shoulders. It's an investment that you've made with all your time, money, energy, thought leadership, everything that you have in order to have this pay dividends in the future, whether that be for paying you right now in your lifestyle that you have or any of those kinds of items, or being able to have something that you can sell and pass on later on. At the end of the day, it's your property, it's your business, it's your thing. Well, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, technology is what allows most of these businesses to function. It's what allows your business to even exist for the most part. And I think people kind of lose track of that. So now you're saying, hey, this thing that I cannot exist without, I'm going to let all the decisions be made without my kind of involvement. And I kind of thought about it like this way a little bit. If you're getting a new HVAC system, even a lot of business owners would be involved in this decision.
Right.
If you're getting a new HVAC system for your company, or say you have one unit that needs to be replaced, and you get a quote from that, and you maybe get a quote from a provider or two, and as long as you trust them and do it, that's a one-time kind of decision that you can go and do. You could outsource that to a lower level employee to make, because it's not going to materially impact the overall functionality of your business. If your computers go down, you're not going to be able to continue to operate. If a hacker steals the data that you're saying you're protecting, you might be responsible for that data theft as the business owner. You might not be able to pass that responsibility off to somebody else. At the end of the day, you, being the one in the helm of your company, allowed this data theft that could happen, that could open you up to lawsuits, it could open up you to regulatory issues, it could open up you to compliance issues, there's all those sorts of things like that. And I'll mention something about that in a minute, but this is the big reason why the business leadership has to be involved, because the risks are higher than I think people realize. The risk of where they might be financially responsible, the risk to their business operations as a whole, and the risk to their sensitive data and who is actually responsible for the sensitive data.
Gotcha. Okay. So does a company have to be a certain size before cybersecurity stops becoming a technical issue and starts becoming more of a business risk, or is it kind of just right out of the gate, if you own your own business, you need to be involved in these types of decisions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It really kind of comes down to, at what point do you start having different users have access to different types of data in your organization?
Gotcha.
A lot of smaller companies, it will be everybody kind of has access to everything. Now, there's a caveat there. That's not true. Whenever I started at Forbes, we had 3 employees. I didn't have access to the bank accounts. I didn't have access to social security numbers of my coworker. I didn't have access to any of that kind of data. So we already know that there's some data segmentation and striation that happens immediately. Not everybody has the keys to everything, but let's say they do. Let's say, okay, that data is separate with the business owner, but everything that we need in order to serve our clients, everybody has access to everything. Well, that might make your decisions about cybersecurity a little bit easier because you protect everybody generally. But once you really start to have like these different departments that shouldn't have access to everything, like Chris is in sales and our sales and marketing people, they don't have access to all the customer data that we have. They don't have access to the client tools to let them remote in. They don't have access to those sorts of things. My techs don't know who to give access to and who to not give access to. Somebody has to tell them who should be set up with what permissions to what, and who should have access to what data. And far too many times we have to make a judgment call here when we deal with companies who are not overall in charge of their cybersecurity of, well, I guess this employee should have access to this, kind of based on job roles that aren't super defined. So even if you don't understand how it's being done, you should have a basic understanding of this person should have access to this, and this is how we're going to make sure that happens. This person is not going to have access to this, and we only give them access to it whenever their job roles need it. And so that kind of leadership has always been needed. And so it's not necessarily size. If you're 3 people, you could start having those distinctions. We really kind of see it a lot when you start to get to like 8 or 10 employees. You start really having people that are more focused in specific jobs instead of having access to everything. But that's not a hard and fast rule. Like all of this, it has to do with what kind of data you have, what does it touch, what are the risks associated with that data.
Gotcha. Okay, and that's, wow, yeah, I mean, the way you explain that, it actually makes a heck of a lot of sense. So let's switch gears a little bit here. Let's talk about, there's been something new. There's been a change to the NIST framework, National Institute of Standards and Technology. There's been a change. What is that change? What's the new version?
Yeah, so new is quote unquote, it happened a couple of years ago, but there was the NIST cybersecurity framework, and so it was kind of a general guide of what you should build your cybersecurity program around your organization in order to work well with other businesses, to keep your data safe, all those kinds of things. So it's the NIST CSF. So the biggest difference, there are some differences, but really the real huge core difference between 1.0 and 2.0 is that they added a whole governance section. And so NIST was always classically identify, know what you have, protect. Okay, well, I'm going to protect the things that I can. And then the red line happens that something bad's happened. So then how fast can you detect that unauthorized access or that unauthorized use and then respond and then recover from that situation? And the idea is to limit the blast radius as far as making things as bad as they could be for your organization. What they've added, though, is this governance thing that goes across the entire bottom of that. So it's a 6th bucket of the NIST cybersecurity framework that covers everything. And the idea from that was to get business leadership back involved in this, because what was happening is too many business leaders were saying, okay, IT and cybersecurity people, this is you, take care of this, I don't want anything to do with it, la, 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 la. And so the cybersecurity framework now says there's this governance section that is business leadership. And they're asking business leadership questions. What is your company mission? What's your business statements? Or what's the idea of how the company is and functions, and what does it do, and what kind of data does it have? And then it just wants the business leaders to have a really high-level understanding of what the risks are, what their cyber resiliency is, and then be kind of at the helm and know that they have a say in this, and they have to have a say in this in order for it to work correctly. And so this is like the big thing when we go through compliance and we look at with companies. When we do the CIS controls here, because we're closer to having more of the CIS controls done with our normal cybersecurity stack than NIST, but it's a small percentage of either way. And we find the forklift to get companies to do compliance is a lot less with the CIS controls than the NIST CSF. What gets in our way, though, is there's a huge amount of decisions and a huge amount of policies and procedures that have to be done by the business leadership. And it's not that it's difficult to do. It's just you need to make a decision. So when I look at the CIS controls, we'll use that because it's easier. In the control group 3, it has data. And it's talking about you making data classifications and saying, hey, this data is sensitive, this data is not as sensitive, and this data is kind of public and we don't care about. So the way I kind of figure that out is you have data that if it gets released, nobody would care, right? Like it's marketing data, whatever, it's public, it gets released, nobody care. You have the middle ground of data that we really wouldn't want it released, but it wouldn't be the end of the world if it did. And then you have really sensitive data where that might be intellectual property, it could be social security numbers, it could be PII data, private health information, it could be all kinds of stuff, legal information if you're a law firm. It doesn't matter. Every company has some sort of data that they really can't have leaked. Okay, well, let's classify this data and where it lives. And then one of the controls later talks about how you're going to limit access to who should have access to what data and not. Me as a cybersecurity organization, I can't make that distinction. I don't know, other than just doing a very simple PII scan, I don't know what's actually sensitive data to you or not. It could be that this data isn't very sensitive, it's not PII, but combined with this record, it suddenly becomes so. So then what do you do with that? That's a business decision that they need to make. And so that's where things start to get a little bit tricky with the leadership, of getting them to understand you can't just ship this off to somebody else unilaterally and say, hey, deal with this. You have to make a choice and a decision because it's your data. You're ultimately responsible for it. If a cyber event happens and lawsuits start flying around, they're going to try to sue everybody. But if I prove that my company did our due diligence and did what we were supposed to do, then ultimately at the end of the day, you as the business leader is going to be responsible for that. Even if you said, hey, I passed it off to somebody else, they're going to say, well, you didn't have the authority to actually pass that off.
Right.
Or that person didn't have the authority to actually make that decision or go about it that way.
Gotcha. So what message do you think when NIST makes a change like this, what message do you think that they're trying to send to business owners the most?
Well, so we'll say the reason that NIST made this change is that the larger organizations started to understand this more.
Right.
So through lawsuits, through whatever else you want to say, through compliance requirements, through whatever, the larger organizations started to understand this. And when I look at your chief information officers versus your chief information security officers, they used to be the CISO, who was in control of cybersecurity, used to be under the chief information officer. And so, or the chief technical officer, either way. It used to be a part of an IT department discussion. So that C-suite employee used to be part of the IT department. Well, sometimes they would be at odds with each other, right? Because the IT department's job is to get things running with as minimal end user impact as possible and let business function. And cybersecurity puts a thing and says, hey, whoa, wait a minute. These certain things need certain guardrails around them due to their sensitivity or compliance reasons or whatever. Big business has split them off into two different departments that don't report to each other. They generally report directly to a higher level C-suite employee like a COO, or a lot of times to the CEO directly. So they're not nested underneath the same thing. So the larger organizations realize this. So now what it takes is the small, medium business owners and leaders to understand that the person that you've given this to might not have the authority to be able to make that decision. And so when they make that change, they're throwing a big flag out there that says, hey, pay attention to this. You have to make a decision on this now. You can't just give it to somebody else and say, not my problem. It is intimately your problem, because at the end of the day, you are responsible for it. Like whether that's to keep your business functioning and maintain your resilience so your business keeps functioning and all these employees keep existing, your business keeps existing, or sometimes you have an actual legal responsibility depending on what type of data you hold to protect that.
Yeah, and that brings me to my next point, too. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, if, let's say, a ransomware event happened, who do you think feels the impact first? Do you think it's the business leader side or the IT side?
Oh, the IT side panics, right? So they're feeling a different kind of thing, but I can tell you the biggest dread that's going to come from is the business leader. And I've seen it whenever I've walked people through cyber events. I've gone to companies who called us when they were having a cyber event. They weren't working with us before, but they called us and I showed up and found the ransomware note. And the IT people are freaking out about how we're going to solve this, and they're worried about their job. The business leader is worried about their livelihood in making sure that this company still exists. And how am I going to make money as this continues to operate? How long am I going to be down for? I look at those people, and they look like, the people when you see off the side of the road after they've gotten in a car crash and they just look pale and they don't know what to do. So I've gone and talked to those people, and like whenever you see a person on the side of the road after they got in a car crash and they just look pale and they don't know what to do.
Right.
That's what these business leaders look like, because their world has come crashing down. They're now, for the first time, being intimately involved. A lot of them are being intimately involved in, how does my business function? What did I lose? What do I have to do? How do I maintain this? And here's the dirty truth of that, is those people that caused that to happen, those lower level employees, whether they're internal employees or third-party IT companies or whatever, they may not be there through the end of this.
Right.
Even the employees that you have may not be there through the end of this. I've seen cases where somebody goes through a cyber event and then a huge chunk of the staff quits because their jobs became impossible to do. They became harder to do due to the threat actor. They worked for competitors because that became easier to do. If you miss a payroll, you're losing employees. If you miss 2 payrolls, you're losing most of them.
Right.
And so your cyber resilience is part of your business resilience as a whole. And you wouldn't necessarily leave, hey, we're going to move into this different market, or we're going to go and buy a building across the other side of town, or any of those sorts of things. You wouldn't leave a decision like that to a low-level employee who didn't have the authority to do so. So why are you leaving this data decision if you don't have access to your data in the line of business applications and whatever you need to actually make your business functions? Do you even have a business? In a lot of cases, with a lot of the companies that we deal with, no. Like, that's the only thing that allows them to survive.
Yeah, I know if I had to go back to pencil and paper, I'd be rethinking my career choice. Let's be honest. Well, let me ask you this. So what's the big difference between outsourcing IT and maybe outsourcing accountability?
Oh,
that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. The IT operations, I still think business leaders should have a kind of a high understanding of how IT functions, because that helps with the cybersecurity discussion. So, but effectively at the end of the day, you can say, this is what we're looking to accomplish, and this is my budget that I have for that. And then you can leave it to an IT person to decide exactly how all of that works. Because there's not really a huge accountability that happens there. It's a math problem. Can I make X operations happen with Y budget and Z time?
Right.
Right?
That makes sense.
And then you can get that to work and all those kinds of things. When we're talking about the type of data that you hold and who's responsible for the accountability of, I have, let's say, a CPA firm, and I have tax data, a one-stop shop for identity theft, right? You could all but credit it in somebody's name for having that. The federal government, through the FTC data safeguards and the GLBA law, tells you that you can't offset that to somebody else, that you're responsible for that as the holder of that data. And so that's where you really can't 100% ship that away. And even I don't think you should anyways, as making these IT decisions. You should have at least an understanding, because that helps with a risk decision as well of, okay, how much downtime can we suffer? Do we have the budget to build the type of redundant systems that we do? But when you're talking about cybersecurity, it becomes a even higher responsibility for the business owner, leadership, whatever, the people who actually have the authority and the permission to be able to make those decisions, to actually be somewhat involved in those decisions.
So, I mean, can you really even have adequate cybersecurity if the business leadership has stepped away completely?
Yes. So you can have a generalized approach to it. And so you can say, hey, we're gonna stack this thing up with so many different cybersecurity tool sets, processes, procedures that are internal, that you can put up roadblocks for the employees. Like you can make it so it'd be hard for a hacker to do what they want to do. But I have a scenario where I audited somebody a couple years ago, and the front desk lady had access to the entire financial folder. Now, she wasn't supposed to, right? So it wasn't a map drive on her computer, but I pulled up the network browser and I browsed for any other devices that were on the network. I found the server, double clicked on the server, and I was able to open up the shared drive, and I was able to pull employees' tax returns and W-2 information and all this kind of stuff on somebody who just had a misconfiguration to do so. And so, at the end of the day, it was obvious that this person shouldn't have had that data, so somebody should have looked into it. But I see a lot of companies where if the business leader doesn't tell somebody that this user shouldn't have this data, then that data is now open for anybody to look at, whether that's the cleaning person that comes in after hours, whether that's, do people know that they have access to that data and what their responsibility is? When you look at some compliance standards, if you do have access to certain type of compliant data, the employees are supposed to have certain trainings that say, hey, this is my responsibility for handling this data. This is my due diligence. That could put you in trouble with the federal government. There's a lot that goes into this. And so, yes, you can do a general cybersecurity and be relatively hands-off from the business leadership side and do this. But the more mature companies, the better companies who understand what's really going on with their organization, who are getting the most out of technology, who are doing all these sorts of things, their business leadership's more involved in this because they realize what the risks really are to their organization, how technology makes them better, how technology makes them more efficient, and also, what a threat actor is acting and what they could get.
So basically, business leaders should be looking at their cyber risk like they would any other financial risk.
They should be looking at it like any kind of risk. And we make risk-based decisions every day as business leaders. Am I going to move into this new market? I'm going to go to this other area. What could harm your risk, kind of a risk-based decision, a risk equation here is what harm would this do to my business versus the benefit that it gets, right? What are the pros? And it's kind of a pro-con list, but if I move into a new market and it harms me for the amount of employee time that I would put into it, the physical expense of doing all those sorts of things, am I going to generate enough revenue in order to cover that and become better on the other side? It's the same thing here is, if I allow somebody access to this data, what is the cost of that? Well, the cost may be a threat actor getting access to it. The cost may be an internal employee doing something they shouldn't do. The cost might be X, Y, and Z, and so you can make a decision there. And so sometimes we see a case of we don't give people access to certain data unless they need it to do their jobs. The cost of that would be a little bit more management overhead and segmenting out this data and giving people access to it as they need it. But then another cost could potentially be, hey, now my employee needs this all of a sudden and they don't have access, so I have to wait a little bit of time to get them access to it. But that makes it so that if a threat actor takes over their endpoint, a threat actor takes over their computer, their Office 365 account, whatever, then they don't have access to it. So your risk is lower as an organization as a whole because now there's less nodes that a threat actor can access data that they shouldn't have.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Have you seen it to where, are you starting to see where executives are actually being held accountable for cybersecurity failures?
Oh, yeah. It's written into compliance standards like FTC data safeguards and some other ones that you're responsible for maintaining the data integrity, the security of this data. I've seen cases, so this is the big thing where hackers steal your sensitive data and they blackmail you for its release. I've seen people pay ransoms because now the sensitive data gets stolen and the hackers are going to release it publicly and to have them delete their copy. Then you think, okay, well maybe paying $70,000 is a good way to prevent that from happening. And so even if it's not a legal responsibility, in order to do so, it sure became a fiscal one. Like it wasn't the employee that paid $70,000 to do that. It wasn't the employee that clicked on something. It wasn't the employee that you offset the cybersecurity responsibility to. It was the business owner because that came out of their pocket. It came out of their profit. It came out of their ability to function and run their business.
Gotcha. And we know, I mean, the end users are the first, in most cases, the first line of defense against initial access, right?
But they're also the biggest risk for initial access, right? So it's both. It's like the double-edged sword. Like they're the ones that are looking for it, but they're also the ones that cause it to happen.
100%. So let me ask you this: with that being said, would you feel that the end users are more likely to care about their cybersecurity if it's their leadership's doing the same and they're preaching about cybersecurity just the same? That's going to come down, right?
Yeah. It's anything with your business. It starts from the top down. That's why business leadership exists. The whole feeling of how cybersecurity is for the organization should come from the top and say, this is important to us, this is part of our core values, and it should come down that way.
Okay, so you wouldn't necessarily trust a CEO who doesn't understand anything about the financials of his business. Should you trust them if they don't know anything about cybersecurity as well? I mean, we're pretty much gotten to that point.
Yeah, that's actually a really good, I didn't think about it that way, but that's actually a really good point to make, is that there needs to be some leadership at the helm. And even if you do have a CFO or a controller or something like that at your company, bookkeeper, whatever, you still need to know what the numbers are doing. You still need to know if you're profitable. You still need to know if you have the right cash flow. You still need to do all that sort of thing because it's what really defines the health of your organization and whether it can continue or not. I would say cybersecurity is probably a very similar thing with that. Is like if you rely on technology to do your business, that then feeds into all those numbers that you're looking at to define the health of the organization, then cybersecurity should definitely be considered. I mean, most of these companies, I say it all the time, they're tech companies in disguise.
Right.
Like, guys, if tech is what allows you to do business, then you're a tech company. And you need to start thinking about it that way. And what are the tech risks that I carry and have?
Gotcha. Yeah, I always look at it as, a business leader's one bad click away from understanding and wanting to know more about cybersecurity that way. That's kind of what I've been saying, at least.
Well, and so I talked about it from a financial side of the person paying the ransom for that sort of thing, but financial side of business downtime, financial side of operational losses, business losses, reputational damage, those all are things that the business leader intimately becomes involved in, and they have to make decisions on if they go through a cyber attack. But then there's legal ramifications as well. Depending on what data gets stolen, you could be responsible for it. And we've seen issues where there was a big nonprofit in this area that had a giant class action lawsuit that happened against them because the sensitive data that they were supposed to be protecting got stolen. And so it turned into a big class action lawsuit and cost them a ton of money. So you better believe that the organizational leadership was involved in that at the end. And they do more cybersecurity now.
Gotcha. So as we're wrapping this up, let me ask you, what are some improvements a small, medium business can do right now with governance that they can implement immediately? Are there some quick things that they can do to help improve what they're doing?
Well, so here's the deal, and this is where part of this comes from my aspect, is figure out what you're doing for cybersecurity and then really open your eyes to see, are you adequately protecting the things? Right. So not only is it being protected, like know what you have, identify, so know what you're carrying, where the data sits, all those sorts of things, then protect what you can. But realize that initial access is going to happen. And then here's my different things that I have. How do I detect that unauthorized access has happened? How do I detect that unauthorized use has happened? And then respond and recover from that situation before one of the three bad things happen. You should have a general idea about how that's being done on your cybersecurity. When I go and I talk to businesses, most of them, 90+% of them are not doing enough for cybersecurity. Probably 70% of those people think they are.
Yeah,
at least, right? And because they don't know, they put it in somebody else's hands. They're like, well, I guess it's enough. And it's like, if your foundation was cracking in the building that you're in, and you were starting to have like the whole roof looks like it's going to cave in, you wouldn't be like, well, I guess it's okay. The guy told me that it's fine and I shouldn't worry about it. No, you would look into it. And so like be more involved, look into it, ask questions. I stand by every single cybersecurity decision we make. If anybody that we talk to wants to know why this decision was made or whatever those things are, we can tell them, yeah, this is why and this is what we're doing. And here's the next thing that you should be doing, because it's never finished.
It's never finished.
It's like, it's never finished. It's like cleaning a room. It's a job you always have to do and it will never be done, but you have to constantly keep doing it. You have to constantly keep cleaning your house because entropy sets in and you have to keep making repairs and doing things like that. That's what cybersecurity is. And the more that the business leadership is on top of that, then the better partners that they become with us. And then we end up, at the end of the day, we get more out of those organizations. They get more out of their technology. They're more profitable. They have a better understanding of how their systems work and the core systems of how their business actually functions. They're able to make better decisions. They're able to use AI better. They're able to do all these kinds of things that make their businesses better, but it really starts there.
Gotcha, okay. So last question here for you, John. So, you know, we've told these business leaders what their role is. What are some questions that we can kind of arm them with that they can take back to their IT team to make sure some of this stuff is getting done?
Yeah, so they really kind of become technical to a certain extent. So we'll use one that's easy because I keep seeing these sorts of things. With business email compromise, it's easy to hide the behavior from an end user, but it's not. It's difficult to hide in the logs. What are we doing to look and see, hey, can we detect if somebody's taken over an email account? How long would it take for us to detect if somebody's taken over an email account? If somebody sets up a rule to send all emails from some user into an RSS feed folder or an archive folder or something like that, could they detect that was potentially weird behavior and maybe have it looked at? Could you detect somebody doing weird behavior on a computer at 3 a.m.? You know, they're starting to look up net BIOS and net accounts and stuff that maybe would be IT doing, ARP caches, things like that. Maybe stuff that an IT company would be doing. Why is this behavior happening when it's not normally happening? That can be an indicator of compromise. Would you know if unusual software got installed on a computer? And I'm not talking hacking software. I'm talking like TeamViewer. If you're not supposed to have TeamViewer on your computer, would you know? Would you know if a hacker installed it and then now weird behavior is happening at that? Those are the types of things that go on that you can start asking from a technical perspective. Start asking them for proof of what they're doing for cybersecurity. And then, you know, have them, like, what cyber trainings are they going to?
Absolutely.
Right? We're going to some cyber conference like once a month on average here. What conferences are your people going to, your employees going to, all those sorts of things to know what's going on with cybersecurity? Are they bringing you ideas for what changes has happened in cybersecurity? You know, are you constantly bringing them things that you should be involved in? Are they making changes to increase your cybersecurity, even though you're not necessarily charging for this? I mean, I can think of 3 or 4 different cybersecurity programs, right, tool sets, and procedures we've put on our company's networks and not gone back and asked them for more money to do that because it was the right thing to do for what we're chasing. And so those are the kinds of things. Is that type of work being done? Because, you know, it might be the difference of your cyber resilience.
Not to mention, I've spoken with a lot of companies who only have one person who's responsible for this. What are they doing? How are they looking for things when they're on vacation? Things like that. It's all things you have to consider. So we gave you some good questions to take back to your IT team to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to. As always, reach out to us with any questions. A conversation with us is always free. Feel free to check out our website or our blogs or other episodes of the podcast. Anything else you want to add, John, before we go?
No, guys, I just kind of want to say this. Take a little bit more of an active role in how your company does the thing that it needs to in order to make money. That at the end of the day is what we're talking about here is how does your company make money? It makes money a lot of the times through its technology, and you need to have a little bit more active role in that. I'm not saying you need to be a cybersecurity expert,
Right.
but you need to have some kind of idea of what's going on and why.
Well said. Thanks, John. And tune in next time, guys.
Thanks everybody.
for joining us.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Uninterrupted, a podcast from Fausz Cybersecurity. We hope you walked away with practical insights to protect your business and stay ahead of the latest cyber threats. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your colleagues. For more tips, resources, and cybersecurity updates, visit Forbis.com, that's 4bis.com, and follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. We'll be back soon with another episode, so stay vigilant and stay uninterrupted.